start. So, y'all know my name, Mao, and where I'm serving right now is Christ United Methodist Church in Greenfield. That is right outside of Milwaukee, suburbs south Milwaukee. And I've been there for 4 years now, and that is this is my very first appointment. I've been a pastor for 4 years, but I have been involved in ministry pretty much all my life. My dad was a pastor, and then I also married a pastor.
He's here too, right?
Yeah, he's here too. How this came into being is because when I was little, my family, my mom and dad became a Christian way before I was born in Laos. I was born in Laos. And then during the Vietnam War, where we migrated to Thailand and we lived in refugee camps. And so we have a missionary who comes to the camp and teaches Bible stories and stuff like that. And so I was really moved at a very young age, probably like 8 or 9. And I was like, I wanted to be a missionary. And so I think that kind of started my journey of wanting to be a missionary, wanting to do something to serve God, and in the denomination that we were with at that time, and also in the Hmong tradition, women couldn't be pastors, so missionary was like the best option, or hoping that you could marry a pastor, right? Pastor's wife. But anyway, when we came to this country, my father, he's actually a church planter, so he planted different churches across the country. And I was a pretty important part of that because I would teach Sunday school, I would drive our 15-passenger van and pick up people and kids to come to church. And so I was very much involved in his process of planting new churches. And then when I got married, when I graduated from high school, I wanted to go to a Bible college. But because, in the Hmong tradition, if I was not married, if a girl is not married, she cannot move out of the house. Let alone, go and live by herself. It's, in those times, it's just, you just don't do that, So I didn't get to go, and my mom was like, she didn't think that I could be a missionary because I was too shy, and that, and so. And then I opted out to becoming a pastor's wife. Well, actually, I met my husband through my sisters. He was going to seminary in Dallas, and I have sisters there. And I was living in Detroit at the time, so they met my husband, and he also was wanting to be a missionary. And they told him that, we have a sister who wanted to be a missionary. So we knew each other for 4 months. We met in May. We talked on the phone in April. We met in May, and we got married in August. Yeah, because if I did not marry my husband, my parents would not let me go to Bible college. And so we were hoping that our plan was to go overseas as missionaries. But as you all know, God closes door. Our plans is not always God's plan. So we ended up staying in the United States, and my husband pastored a few Hmong churches across the country. And so when we came to the United Methodist Church in 2003, somehow God opened the doors so that he was able to come in and plant churches, because that was really his calling. He didn't think that he was a pastor material, but he can plant churches. So we came to Green Bay, and he actually started the Hmong, if you guys know the Hmong Faith Ministry in Green Bay, Wisconsin. So we were there for 10 years before we moved to Wisconsin. But anyway, it was coming to the United Methodist Church that has really kind of made me realize that, hey, I can really serve in a different capacity, more than just a pastor's wife. And I didn't think that I have the ability to do that at first, but I think a lot of people saw the gift that is in me before I knew it. But I wasn't, life wasn't fulfilling because I was trying to do a lot of stuff in my life, and I just wasn't, a lot of education, but really nothing important and nothing fulfilling in my life. So, yeah, that's when I decided that, maybe that is God's calling. And so I went into seminary and then graduated in 2013, and then I got appointed here in Greenfield. And so, yeah, it's been a long process, but I think that God has a way of kind of like shepherding me to where I need to be. So that's my story. Yeah, and it's very good. Yeah, it's been great. I think that it's very fulfilling being a pastor. There are challenges along the way. For example, the Hmong churches are still not. They still have a hard time with having a woman pastor. So I think when I first graduated from seminary, the bishop wanted to appoint me to Minnesota to a Hmong church up there, but they were not ready for a women pastor. So that's why I ended up in Wisconsin. But again, it is all in God's plan and how He directs me and how He's going to help me, equip me so I can become a better pastor, a better person. So, but it is, yeah.
May I compliment you on your good English?
Thank you. Yeah.
So in your Greenfield church, do you have English worship service and Hmong?
No, it's all English. It's like
okay.
99% white.
Okay.
Yeah, I have one family that is Hmong, and she's a single mom. In the Hmong community, it's very hard for a single mom to integrate into the community. So she knew me, so she felt comfortable. So that's why she joined the church when I came. Yeah. But it's a privilege to be here with you all.
Thank you.
How did your family feel about you becoming a pastor?
I can't tell from the inside, but on the outside they seem okay. I don't really, my father doesn't talk much about it because he's a die-hard Southern Baptist, my father. So he doesn't talk about it, but I'm sure there are some, hesitant in him, but he doesn't, I don't know it, My families are very supportive.
Good.
Yeah.
That's good.
That reminds me of, my family's always been very supportive too. I started, I think, experiencing a call to ministry when I was about 5 or 6. Listening to a sermon on the Great Commandment, and the pastor, I remember the point of we're all called to be in ministry. And then in high school, I attended church camp every summer. That was kind of like my own personal vacation. I raised my money and I went by myself. My family was part of the UCC church, and there used to be a camp outside of Montello. And I went there, and it was a day we went on a hike up to this meadow above the bog, and that I really experienced a call to ministry there, but I really kind of ignored it because I didn't know of any women in ministry. I had not experienced any women in professional ministry, and it all just seemed, besides I always thought I wanted to be a teacher. So I graduated from high school and went to college and got a job. Well, I actually started out as a business major because I couldn't decide what I wanted to teach. I don't know, I was 18, what did I know, And so I was undecided, but I got involved in campus ministry. And I was real involved in that and played my guitar and, it was the 70s, what can I say? And then the summer after my sophomore year, after I had finally decided I was going to be a biology teacher, that was the only thing I could I didn't want to teach little kids, I knew that. So I decided I was going to be a biology major and go into education, and so I went to Pilgrim Center, which is also a UCC camp in Green Lake, and then experienced another call to ministry and met a woman who was in Christian education. She was a Christian educator, and had also met Leslie Watkins, some of you remember, who was serving as Director of Christian Education at the Platteville United Methodist Church, which is where I was going to college, and they hired me to be the junior high choir director. I could play guitar, and Dick Jones was the senior pastor, and he and the campus minister kind of got in cahoots, and they started having me meet with Leslie and talk about ministry, and the next thing I knew, I went off to Pilgrim Center, and I came back, and I told the campus minister that I felt called to ministry, but I had this, what I thought was very confidential conversation. Next thing I know, he and Dick were sending me seminary catalogs. Yeah. So I graduated and I went to seminary and had a couple of other experiences along the way, and decided that in that mix that I really felt called to do Christian education. It was kind of like I knew how to do that. Kind of, sort of, that didn't feel quite as challenging to me, but I was going to I entered the MDiv program so that I could be ordained if I wanted to be, if I felt called to be ordained, which I did, and met a number of other people along the way, and I entered seminary in 1979, and I started attending what was then called pastor's school, probably the first time in 78, maybe 79, one of those years, and started meeting other women in ministry. And if you look at that list that Sandy provided yesterday, starting, and Shomi was one of my first supervisors. After my first year in seminary, I went up to Washburn where she was, and did leisure ministry, and Lynn is not allowed to bring out the picture of me up there.
It's a great picture. That's the benefit of being the conference archivist.
But I met these people, and there were only, if you look at the list, there were like 15 to 20, including seminarians. And at School for Ministry especially, we would go out for breakfast together. And that was just a really, I saw these people, Sharon Brown Christopher, and Lynn Lemke-Schreck, and Chris Bethke, and I don't remember if you were there at breakfast or not, Sean.
Neither.
Okay. Marilyn Rushton, and, Donna Green, Marilyn Hare, Joan Deming. You all were the first ones. You were for sure the first ones. I was the first or second woman in every appointment I've had. First or second clergy woman, including my current appointment as conference benefits officer. Jane Daniels was the first clergy woman, and I'm the second. By the luck of the alphabet, I remember when Bishop Matthews was elected and she was assigned to Wisconsin, and that was really a very important time for us as clergy women at that time. It was just such a boost in the arm, that yes, we really are all called to do this. And even though I've had a lot of support over the years, and some of you are in the room here today, there was kind of this tension. On the outside, people were very supportive. my family, I never got a lot of backlash, but my sister was in junior high at the time, and she would go, and teachers would ask her, what I was doing after I went to seminary. She was going to be a minister. She was really embarrassed. They've since come to, be a little bit more supportive of me. And yet in the church, I think I was fairly well accepted as pastor. I do remember my first appointment, Lake Street in Eau Claire. I was working with Dave Cruz as associate, and he had been without an associate for 6 to 9 months. The person before me had left and followed some other pursuits, and they waited until, I came in. My introductory meeting with the DS and the SPRC went over 2 hours. They sent me out of the room twice. Dave Cruz came to me, and he was just, Dave, where's Bev? Just shaking his head. Jean, this isn't about you. This is about, I'm like, yeah, it's about me. I'm the one they're interviewing. But so I got there. He worked with me for like 2 or 3 weeks, and then he took off on a 3-week vacation with his family to the East Coast. This was the day before cell phones. This was 1983. And I swear anybody and everybody who was going to have a crisis in that congregation that summer had it in those 3 weeks. And when he came back the first Sunday, the head usher, named Joe, we had done like 3 funerals and, God only knows what else. And he went up to Dave and he said, your little girl did a good job while you were gone, Dave. And I just kind of stood there like, well, I obviously can't say anything. And Dave just turned bright red and he stammered a little bit and he looked him right in the eye. And this guy was like 3 heads taller than Dave is too. And he looked him right in the eye and he said, yes, Joe, my woman colleague did a very fine job. And I really did get that kind of support. When I was a student in Delavan, I was treated like a full associate, a pastor. I preached every month, and I can still remember Roy Deming would walk down the aisle, after the worship service, and no matter what I preached, no matter what I said, no matter how bad I bombed, he would look at me and say, good job. He was incredibly gracious to me. But there was always that kind of, tension. When I got at Lake Street too, I got pregnant with my only child. And for the most part, people were very gracious and they were very excited and all this. But then I had this person who called me on the phone one night and just reamed me out because how could I be so selfish? That was early on, but then, everybody else really rallied around and they really took care of me. I had some problems and the whole conference was very supportive and Bishop Lawson was very supportive. And so that kind of thing happened where on the outside people were pretty much supportive, but then there'd be these little things here and there that would just kind of, not make sense. My last local church appointment, and Dick and Jean, you'll appreciate this one. You know who the staff parish chair was at that time. Again, my interview took 2 hours. Jeff had his the night before in his appointment, and Steve Polster had just been appointed a DS, and he took us out there. And the night before, one of his standard questions to people was, well, what do you want your new pastor to do in their first 2 weeks? And at Jeff's meeting, they said, move in, unpack, go to the post office, meet people, go fishing. I'm like, go fishing? His meeting took 45 minutes. Next day, we go to mine, 2 hours. They sent us out. Steve came out 2 times, they didn't call me back, but, 2 times, well, they'd had some struggles with, I was the second woman, and unfortunately they'd had some struggles, and so they weren't very trusting, and about 3 months into it, I had to print my schedule every week, where I was going to be when. And the staff parish chair would come to check to make sure if I said I was going to be in the office, I was there. I would see him drive up into the parking lot of the church in the Dells. If you've ever been there, they've got these big windows. He'd drive in, and then, at first he came in to check on me, but then he'd drive in and he'd drive out. I'd watch him. We came in one day, and Jeff was there with me, and he looked at us and he said, well, people are asking us, how come they got the man and we had to have the woman? Oh. This was 1998. Oh. I was like, and Jeff just kind of got red at that time, and he just looked at me and said, trust me, you've got the one you want. But we did fine. I mean, we had good ministry. We grew the churches. They built on. They went from Davis Corners not having indoor plumbing or central heat to adding on. And then I went to the foundation, and Dick came in and helped him pay it all off in 1 year. So, there was always this kind of tension, and you just never knew. But for me, I felt called. I had a lot of support, and I knew there were all these people, and we would gather together for support too. When in the Northwest District, we all used to drive an hour to an hour and a half once a month for lunch as clergywomen. And we had clergywomen consultations every 4 years for a long time. The last one was in 2006. And those were incredible events, national and international events. And when Sharon Brown Christopher was elected a bishop from our annual conference, that was probably one of the high points for me. And we as clergywomen gathered around her and prayed for her, and we asked her what we could do for her that would be the most helpful, and she had said to pray for her. And so we had a prayer calendar. And I still pray for Sharon Brown Christopher on the 15th of every month. So
I'll add a footnote to that. After you left the Wisconsin Dells, people there thought you were a goddess.
That happened a couple places where they liked me a whole lot more after I left.
I'll be glad. It's usually they blame
It started
everything.
on one story, which Jeff tells more often than Jean does, that Marjorie Matthews being the first, female bishop in our denomination, and Jean, by the luck of their draw, being Jean Ehrner then, right?
Yeah, Gray Ehrner, yeah.
Alphabetically was the first one that Bishop Matthews ordained, right?
So as a deacon, yeah.
She's the first one ordained deacon by the first woman bishop in our denomination, so she has that claim to fame also.
Yeah, he would introduce me to confirmation classes as an archival relic.
Right. So it's important that she was here to do that today. Thanks, Jean.
Well, you heard my story yesterday. One question was, what interested you? The first mention of my being in ministry was when, as seniors at Beloit College, we took I think it's the Cooter Preference Test. Why they waited until senior year preference. But anyhow, mine turned out a number of things, but I remember minister or writer of greeting card verses. Which I find a rather interesting the second time it came up was in Neubrücke, where our post chaplain was a Presbyterian, and the Presbyterians voted for full clergy rights for women. in 1956, the same year that the Methodists did. And he suggested that I might be a good candidate for the Presbyterian Church. All of this I ignored until late in seminary, as you know. I think one question I would toss out here is a challenge. And the biggest challenge I think I have faced has been it's God's church, but it's also the congregations, and it's also the pastors. And when somebody in the congregation wants another pastor, an old friend, a member of the family, and they have been there all their lives, and that congregation's going to last a good deal longer than the United Methodist pastor's going to be there. How hard do you push? When do you push to insist that I'm the pastor in charge, whether you like a woman in that position or not? And when do you just kind of back off and let them go the way that they want to? You find that question coming up repeatedly. Sometimes I made the right answer, the right choice, sometimes I didn't. I would turn it over to Nancy.
What was the question again?
Tell us.
Well,
This is sharing your stories.
Oh, yeah. Well, those of you who know me know I got stories that would keep us here till probably next year. But you said something about what drew me to ministry. Show me was there. I don't know how important you were or what an impact, but it was and some of you heard this story. It was 1953. I was 13 years old. J. Ellsworth Callis. Some of you remember him. He was 12 feet tall and had smooth, big hands and a voice that kind of honey. And he lisped a little bit. Just a little. His other word, little. Anyway, on Thursday nights at camp, I was at Camp Byron every year for those first few years. We had our consecration service, and there was J. Ellsworth preaching in front of a cross with a fire behind it. And I don't know, something was happening to me, but I was drawn in, and he said, if you want to give your life to Christ, step up and come forward to the cross. You might come all the way to the cross, or you might just come part of the way to the cross. Well, I got up. I didn't know what I was doing. A few of us got up, went toward the cross. I didn't go all the way to Jesus then. And, but I got up and went to the cross. Well, then, after that, we all sat down again and sang, in my heart, into So we sang that, and then J. Ellsworth said, now you might like to know, those of you who've given your life to Christ, you might like to know what you can do. Boys, you can become ministers. Girls, you can become ministers' wives. I'm still not sure that I'm supposed to be a pastor.
Wow.
It took a while. And I think by 1982, this was 1953, by 1982, I got married at 18 while I was still in high school, had 4 kids by the time I was 22, had a couple sets of terms in a psychiatric ward, once locked up, because I really thought, after a religious weekend, that in order to prove my life, my love for God, I had to die. And I had to kill myself. So be careful when you listen to the voice of God. Be very discerning. So after all that, Bruce Bartell asked me to be ministries coordinator, created a job for me at Emmanuel Church in Appleton. And from there, I ended up going into seminary. Bruce gave me the Christian as Minister book, and I went to seminary. And that was an interesting place too. And I think finally, with feminist theology, which may be a dirty word now, I don't know, but feminist theology finally put the pieces together for me that, well, here's the phrase, not to call God Father is unbiblical. To call God only Father is idolatry. And these days, what Jean and I experienced, Jean and I were at seminary at the same time. Well, she got there earlier. We were in seminary where our papers needed to be in inclusive language. We went out into churches. My first appointment, they didn't want a woman, and they didn't want someone right out of seminary. And a very angry woman threw her body across the table right when I sat down and said, "Don't you read 1 Timothy? You shouldn't even be here. What are you doing here?" She left, thank God. Went down to the gospel chapel down the street. And I did 5 years there, and we had a very good ministry. I don't know where I was. I get lost in the stories.
Inclusive language.
Language, yes. Okay, so we got out into the churches but I was 45 years old then, and I was not going to push, but I've been told, I had enough trouble just being a woman.
That wasn't a ditch, I was gonna die in.
Yeah, you just show up as a woman and you're in trouble. I had people come to funerals and weddings that had never seen a woman pastor. Told me for a girl I did a pretty good job. In any case, there was at that time a study, Words That Hurt, Words That Heal. My experience now is that all that stuff has been forgotten. Charlie and I are both retired. We go to different worship services, and it's Father almost exclusively. There are, not that I'm trying to change the Lord's Prayer or change the Apostles' Creed. The focus that I did was we keep those things because that's what people connect with, and some are there. It's our foundation. We do all sorts of other things with other names and other phrases and other ways of looking at something that's ultimately mystery. That's all. If you've got questions, I'd be glad to try to answer them. But I warn you, I have stories.
You who are ministers' wives, you who are ministers, how did you deal in the Methodist Church with moving you?
Oh, you mean being reappointed?
Being
reappointed?
Yes.
We pack.
Well, I think.
Did they move you?
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Oh, I think our cabinets over the years have been very.
Cabinet has been wonderful.
Yeah, our bishops and cabinet. Wisconsin is a good place for women in ministry, and has been. There have been times when people who were, I can think of one clergy couple where they were appointed too far apart to live together, but for the most part, they've been very accommodating and caring toward us as much as they can be. They have restraints on them also, but they know that keeping families together helps keep people sane. You know, you're going to, I mean, Wes was on the cabinet back in the early days, and I'm sure there were places where you knew you could take women and you knew you couldn't.
And his wife didn't want to go with him a couple times.
Yeah.
Because she got to get a different job.
Yeah.
Not only clergy
And
that.
it is. And you know, when I was appointed to the foundation, after 20-some years of being the pastor, all of a sudden I was the pastor's wife. I'd been the pastor's wife, but now I really was the pastor's wife. And for those of you who are, I thought that was harder than being the pastor.
And I think there also have been male pastors whose wives have not been clergy, but whose wives have a good professional job. And for the husband to be appointed somewhere else is a problem because it would require the wife, who was well established in a good position, would require her to leave, and the cabinet has been sympathetic and taken that into consideration and left the pastor where he was.
I think they do their best. You know, there are some people who've been very hurt in the process, and that's unfortunate. But I think for the most part, they do their best.
Do you think that churches really expect it? You know, because we've talked about ministers' wives, and the ministry is often a joint ministry, whether they're a clergy couple or not, right? So if there's not a clergy spouse, or if the spouse happens to be a male, is the church feel like they're missing something because they've come to expect that role? You know, or has that changed now?
I don't think anymore.
Okay.
I think in the Caucasian church, that is the case because of, you know, like right now at my church, you know, they just don't expect that my husband is going to be there, or at my husband's church, they just know that I'm not going to be there because we're both pastors. But I know when I first was, you know, appointed, some of the Hmong women, the Hmong churches were concerned. They're like, especially when it comes to my husband, I think, we joked about it, but I said that I think he got demoted. Because no Hmong church, I think Hmong churches will be hesitant to take him because he doesn't have a pastor's wife anymore.
Yeah.
You know, because in a Hmong church, you know, the pastor's wife is part of the package.
Right.
And if he doesn't have a pastor's wife, or if the wife is not there all the time, what are they going to do, you know? And I have had women ask me, well, you know, we don't have a pastor's wife, so what are we going to do? I said, you all are women. But that is, you know, I think in the Hmong churches, they still struggle with that. But I think the Caucasian church, they came a long way. They came to accept that, you know. You can't expect a pastor's spouse to be there. Yeah.
I was married to my husband the last 17 and a half years of his Air Force career. And I can so relate to, you get settled in a job and your husband gets orders and hey, you're out of there. And I never even had a name. I was only the last 4 digits of his Social Security number. And it's just, I mean, anywhere we went, he knew what he was going to wear. He knew what he was going to be doing. He usually knew someone else that worked on the same equipment, and the kids and I had to start all over every time. And we moved a dozen times, and frankly, it got old. So I can understand. And we now have Pastor Clarissa Martinelli is at our church now, and her husband, and she spent 25 years in the Navy, and he was in the Navy briefly and then was in an accident, and she was a nurse at the hospital. That's how they met, but he got a medical discharge. So he was Mr. Mom, and I don't mean anything racist, but she had a funny story about, she was in the Philippines, and he called and she could hear her daughter crying in the background because she's black and he's white, and he didn't know how to comb his daughter's hair. And she said, it tore my heart out. But she stayed in for 25 years, but it worked for them. It wouldn't have worked for everyone. But It's a hard life being a wife too,
Well,
or a
kids,
husband too.
yeah, kids a lot of times have a lot of resentment. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
my son lived in 6 different houses by the time he was 12.
Yeah,
And some of that was moving because of different appointments, and then his dad and I got divorced, and then I was remarried. Similar timeline to your marriage, but, and then we moved again, and so, yeah, he's not, and I know a lot of clergy are, PKs who have issues with bishops in the church.
oh, yeah. Then we moved to West Bend, which is
It used to be Mama's.
so white, and my kids came home from high school the first day, and they both said the same thing. They said, it's so boring, everybody's white. Because they were raised with God's beautiful color of every race, creed, whatever. And that's how they were used to living, and it's gotten a lot better in West Bend, believe me.
Well, Boston is 159, 158 years old, and they've gotten their first woman pastor for the last 2 years.
Oh, wow.
Now, I don't feel that there's any special thing that they expect out of Don, and she made it very clear at the very beginning that there were some meetings that he's not going to be at, and that there is, and that he's his own thing, and he has his own talents, and I don't think there's any, they accept him for who he is.
Well, we don't expect Pastor Clarissa's husband to come to the UNW meetings, but,
For example, at the very beginning, they had these small groups of meet and greet the pastor.
yeah.
He didn't come to all, if he came to any.
Right.
And she said that he's more of an introvert. This is not his thing.
It's
She told him that, told us
personal.
that, right?
And
Why are they involved?
I'd like to talk about the pastors' wives again. We've come to the conclusion, I'm sure you all have too. Your churches have 5 generations. I'm of the top generation. I have been a very independent woman all my life. My husband insisted that's the way our relationship was. But I enjoyed that pastor's wife when I was in a church. I enjoyed seeing that. I enjoyed seeing that couple together. The last church I was in, which was Presbyterian, big one, big cathedral type, the minister would come down after and he'd stop at his wife's pew, and she would join him and go out, and they would visit the congregation together. I think that's a generation thing too. My generation, always had pastors' wives. If any of you knew Ray Robinson and his wife, she was one of the last pastors' wives. And I think it's kind of missing. I really think it's kind of missing.
What's the value that you're missing?
Seeing this couple working together and just working for the church, I don't know. I don't know what the answer is.
That there's a value, something that...
It's something you grow up with, something you learn to have, and it just sticks with you.
My grandmother, I told you about my evangelical grandfather yesterday. So my grandmother did that. She greeted people at the door after the service. She went on home visits. She went to the hospital where her husband, the pastor, went. But that was in the early 1900s, late 1800s. She didn't have a career. This was her career, being a pastor's wife.
But I can remember going to the SPRC committee when they were going to hire it, and the district superintendent, and I'm sure you probably did the same, Wes, announced. Not there, you could ask any questions you want of Jean. That was me. But Jean you are not to hire Dick
Yes.
on condition whether she can play the piano for church, whether she can sing in the choir, or any of those questions. They're insignificant of what Dick has to offer. So what I had to offer, whether I was going to be a part of the church or not the church, had nothing to do with being hired for that congregation. Probably you had some more words that you said, I can't remember.
Well, we all try to make sure that they understood that they were not hiring the people.
Right. I want to speak something about passersby from my own experience. I want you to know, I think, I think that, the idea of having the pastor and the pastor's wife working together in ministry in that way, it's great, It's both a call into that role. Because, I think my husband is fortunate that, and I me too, that we were both called into do God's work, and we both have this passion to do the work of God. But I can tell you that I know a lot of pastors' wives who are kind of like pushed into that role.
Yeah.
And she's not called, but she's pushed into that role, and she is very hurt. She's not gifted, but people expect her to look good, to be something that she cannot be. And I can,
particularly people who have gone into ministry as a second career.
Yeah, and I can tell you that a lot of pastors' wives are not healthy because they feel pressure.
Yeah.
And so, in that sense, I think that we have to consider the person's calling, and that if she is, if she has a call to support her husband, that is great. I mean, we should treat her just like any other church members, and this is what I tell the Hmong women. They say, because the Hmong women pastors still struggles with this because they feel like they have to behave a certain way just because they are pastor's wife. The kids has to be perfect, their health has to be perfect. We have to go to all of the women's meetings, and whenever they have a potluck or something, she's like, have to be there, she has to cook, she has to know how to cook and all of that, So can you imagine the expectation that they place in the pastor's wife? And she just cannot be that person, and it's great that you can, but what if you're not? And I tell you that a lot of clergy struggles in their marriage because of that. And so I think that as people, as God's people, we have to value the individual's calling. And it is great to see the couple serving. Just like in church, right? It's always great to see couples going to church together and having a loving family, which is great, But as far as, being the pastor's wife, I think that we made that role, we created that role, and we made that role bigger than it needed to be. And I think that we put unnecessary pressure on these women, not seeing them for who they are, but seeing them as a role. And I think that's why.
I have to say one positive thing, though.
Yeah.
No, my life in parsonage was really good. I chose what I wanted to do. But as we would tell our children for these moves, I wonder what other profession in which there would be a move, there would be a home for you, there would be a welcoming committee, they would know your name, people would go out of their way to introduce their children and be helpful.
Yeah.
So that was positive.
Yeah.
That was
it was.
Oh, yeah.
That was when Wesley West was the pastor, and you were the pastor's wife.
Not when he was a DS.
No, but I mean,
Another story.
I mean, that's the kind of welcome
Oh, yeah.
that,
We felt that, right.
and he was the pastor.
Oh, yeah.
There's a couple pastors' wife stories. Luckily, I got older and more mature, and so a lot of this stuff was funny. But Charlie and I were married in 1990, and I'd been single for 5 years, and moved into the parsonage. He was at Kenosha first, and I was appointed at Bristol and Wesley Chapel, which had two of everything. And Charlie got confronted by the UMW president that I was not attending the UMW meetings. He told them, he said, well, she's attending two out in the county. The other one is a pastor's wife story that we then, after both being retired, we were asked to do some interim work. So we were in 5 different churches doing a short-term kind of ministry. And one of them was Calvary in West Allis, now called Blessed Hope. There was a woman there that did that embroidering on canvas or plastics, whatever. Anyway, she did bags full. And she came in one Sunday morning. I was in the office. Charlie was down. Charlie, we traded preaching. He preached and then I preached. We traded everything up evenly. And he was down at the beginning, in the north, not the north, that's sanctuary, way down the aisle, and I was in the office. And she came in carrying a couple bags, and she needed to talk to the pastor. And her friend that was with her pointed toward me, and she looked and she said, "No, I want to talk to the real pastor." That's the kind of stuff, you get one-on-one, but overall things have really changed. Yeah. But unless you get those little one-on-one kinds of things, you don't know really where folks are.
I want to go. Well, just 2 things. Some women have been specifically called to be a pastor's wife. And I think particularly of Jenny Briggs. Al Briggs, what do you remember Jenny? Yeah. No. And then there are, I can remember situations where pretty much the church kept the pastor because they wanted to keep his wife. But also, let's face the fact that in those situations, we were wanting 2 employees for the price of 1. Yeah.
Oh my God. It's no different than business though.
But I wonder if it's more pressure on the woman, because the woman's supposed to take care of the family. So if a woman pastor comes, are there's those expectations on the husband as great? I would tend to doubt it, but I don't know. But it's part of it. But I think it is a 2 for 1.
First I ran into that with Brian Condinger. Do you know Brian Condinger?
Yeah.
And Jan, and I was, he came to church after Gary Robinson, and I was treasurer of the church at the time. And then Jan came on, Brian's wife, as secretary. So I worked with her, a lot. And that's the first that somebody said to me, we didn't hire the 2 for 1 thing.
I think it's a couple things here.
Well, there's just been such a shift of women's work and women's, we're not like Wobegon and church basement ladies where, women have all the time to do all these potlucks and all of these because they're working. And so I'm sure it makes it even harder for the women ministers, to try to pull this together, in a time when nobody has the time to do some of this stuff, traditional.
When I went to my second appointment, it was a 2-point charge, and they had a huge, they still do, they have a huge homemade ice cream social every August. And they would hand out slips of paper, on Sunday morning of what you were supposed to bring. And I got assigned 2 or 3 or 4, I don't remember now. It didn't matter how many, it seemed impossible, pies. Now, I can make pie, and I did. I made my pies, but then I chose to fight the battle this way.
Yeah.
I made the pies, and then I went to them and said, I didn't mind doing this, but it might make more sense next year to let me bring something like milk or butter or something like that, so that if I get a call because somebody's sick or dying, I don't have to say, no, I'm sorry, I have to pay that. And they got it. Mike?
Okay, the question I have to ask you is, how come ministers will not, they have their own homes, and you have a beautiful parsonage that's next to the church, and now the church turns into a landlord's because you won't move in, or you decide that if you're going to be a minister, you're going to stay in your house, and you don't. That's what hurts me, because I don't care whether it's man, woman, or whatever it is, that we can't sell a parsonage because the county won't let you, and now we're landlords, which people don't even join the church, or whatever it is, and you have to put up with other people living in something that you really struggled in the 50s to build, and actually at that time was one of the best ones in the state of Wisconsin, and now the ministers don't even look at it.
I have an answer. Talk to your pastor.
Well, and that's a district superintendent and cabinet issue.
But it's a church issue.
It's a church issue. It is. Some people do and some people don't.
And it's each pastor has their own preference, because I would move into a parsonage if my church has one. You know, so it just depends on the pastors and their situation. So
and full-time or part-time.
Part-time, yeah.
If you have full-time or part-time, but I know that it's, I mean, I've shook my head a couple times because I never would have, I mean, if there was we never had a choice. You know, either if they had a parsonage, you lived in it. If they didn't have a parsonage, the only choice, well, we didn't even have a choice. If we were a clergy couple, they made the choice where we lived. They didn't, we didn't really have a choice. So it is happening more and more, and I think it's I hear your pain, but that's, a lot of churches who can't afford full-time, the pastors are living and working somewhere else and then driving in to be a part-time pastor too, so.
Our pastor's full-time.
Your pastor's full-time. I couldn't remember.
Why can you not sell it? Because
it's
an
right
awful
next
lot
door.
of churches did sell their parsonages.
Is the property adjoining the church, is that?
Yeah, it can't. They can't split it up. We'll never be able to split it up.
Are you
And you've got a local political problem, not a church problem.
Do you pay a housing allowance too?
Yeah.
Do some Methodist ministers, families have their own homes and buy their own?
Kate, did you have a question?
Oh, well, it would back us up a little bit.
Okay.
But my sister-in-law is a local pastor in Angleton, Texas. South Texas. Yes, they went through the hurricane. But my brother then is a pastor spouse, right? And you were talking about expectations being one way for maybe a female spouse and one way for possibly the husband as spouse. Well, my brother decided that he was going to buy a motorcycle. And because it made sense down there, you can do that most of the time, and it's cheap transpo, and he could get to work and the whole thing. Well, this did not go over well. Because, and they talked to my sister-in-law, Bonnie, and said, Pastor Bonnie, it is not proper for the pastor's spouse to ride a motorcycle. So there's a little bit going back, that is South Texas, which is not here. It's not here, but there is a little bit of that could be happening too, so, yeah.
Not so much a question, but a comment maybe you can comment on. A lot of the reading of these very early women who were called to preach the gospel, even back in the 19th century, like Georgia Benedict, reading her memoir, and Georgia Harkness, and M. Madeline Southern, all these revolutionaries of their time. If you read their memoirs, they universally describe themselves as incredibly shy. As incredibly, and I thought when I read these stories, I hear about these firecracker women who were, troublemakers from the age of 3, who were bucking the system, but actually they were not. And I wonder if you could comment on what it took, what kind of personality it took to break into the greatest male fraternity on the earth.
I was shy, and I know that wasn't a joke. Especially after being hospitalized and having community humiliation and shame. And little by little, through churches, I began to come out of my shell or test some things. I was blessed with some intelligence, and my husband then helped with some schooling. I went back to college. And had some success there. So I think it's step by step by step. My father, who was very rigid and demanding, came through St. James Church one Sunday morning. He came up to visit and said to the pastor, "Why are you singing a cappella? Nancy can play." Well, it scared, I guess I could say that. I can't say that for another word. It scared it. Because all of a sudden, I was supposed to be playing the organ. Every Sunday morning, it got funny later, every Sunday morning or the choir practice, the choir would put a roll of toilet paper on it. But little by little, it happens little by little. And it happens when people like Lorraine Krieger at Emmanuel would say, "Nancy, you have such a good projection, such a good voice, or you have such a good presence when you're reading the scripture." It's those little things. And then pretty soon, little by little. Does that answer?
Yeah.
I don't know if it answers for, Mom, you said you were shy.
Yeah, I was very shy. I was very quiet. Like we have 9 kids in my family, 6 girls and 3 boys, and I was like very quiet. I would just let like when my parents buy something to eat, dessert. Everybody just go and grab whatever, and then I would just go and take whatever's left over. So I was very shy, and I was very agreeable, very very easy child for my parents. I would never get into trouble, and stuff like that. But I think because of that attitude, a very introvert person who thinks a lot, and who is very diligent in what I do. And I think being that, I see things around me that is not right, And so what gives me the courage to do what I do is because for me it is the justice, speaking out. Even if I'm shy or if I'm scared, I know that I still have to do it because it is the right thing to do. And so that gives me the strength to do it. But of course, it's also a calling from God at the same time, because I know if it was not God's calling, I wouldn't be able to do what I do as well. So, but I think it is that because you see that most pastors are introverts, and introverts think a lot. They think about the world and think about this. They do a lot of observing of people and how people behave and how like for example, like me. I grew up in a culture where, you know, women are treated really badly. Women are just like pieces of property, you know. Men could have 3, 4 wives, you know. And so for me, as a young girl, I always thought that was very unfair, you know what I mean? And I just thought that was really terrible, you know. And so I think that little by little, I see things, I see the injustice in the world, and I see how God speaks to that, you know. So I think that is why I want to be the agent for God and speaking truth into people's lives.
I'm an extrovert, but I grew up very, like Shomi, with very clearly defined gender roles. And I never really challenged that too much, although I can remember as a small child, my dad was a farmer. I'm the oldest, and then there's 2 boys, and then I have a younger sister. And his farm truck, his big farm truck, it was a big day when he could afford to, you know, people wrote their names on the doors. And he wrote Russell, Einert, and Sons. And that just, I mean, I went to him and said, Daddy, how come it just says and Sons? He didn't have an answer for it. You know, it's kind of like, well, that's just what we do, honey.
That's the way it is.
You know, that's the way it is. And my mom was told by my grandfather, who I adored, that she could not go to college because she was a girl. And so she made sure that we had, you know, we believed we could do whatever we wanted to do. And my parents had very clearly defined roles. They were farmers, and it was clear the barn and the animals and the farm was my dad's responsibility. The house and the kids and the yard was my mom's. The only time my mother went to the barn was when my dad was sick. And so I kind of grew up with that. But most people, I mean, most women, and I think most effective pastors, rely on developing good relationships. You know, the strength of our ministry is in the relationships and in proclaiming the gospel through our lives. And there are times when we have to challenge injustices, but for the most part, there aren't very many of us who really like conflict. And so that's, you know, I think that's where, how it happens, and most women in particular, you know, they were, especially back then, they were dealing with a lot of different things, and so, you know, you weren't going to last very long if you challenged everything that happened.
If you go to see the church basement ladies, you'll notice the Lutherans have the same problem.
Yeah.
So are there any last questions that we have? I mean, the panel, you guys have been wonderful. I mean, I thank you for your honesty and openness and willingness to share with us.
We didn't get to the part where I was being driven out because there was a posse that formed to get rid of me.
Oh, that's
So I want to say, are there some last stories that you want to share?
I'm going to be writing those because I think some of the stuff that happens in local churches now is just the kind of thing Jane's talking about, relational things. You know, it's some Mike who really has issues, feelings about parsonages, or somebody that really doesn't want to have a woman pastor, or somebody who said the wrong thing on a Sunday morning, and so now they're forming a group of people to get rid of you. And so those things, those are stories too. And we didn't really even get to the congregation, which Shomi got toward it, but we didn't get there. It isn't just the clergy. in a congregation. It's
You
a
have to have
family.
team ministry.
It's a community.
Yeah. I think it's a really, really difficult time to be a local church pastor.
I do too.
So a discussion like this isn't useful. I was trying to get this organized on the district level, other women and more women to bring out their stories. It doesn't always only have to be women, but I'm just starting with women because it seems right. Is there more that we trying to pursue this, do you think? I mean, I thought this was fabulous to have this discussion. But, and I'm going to try, we'll see what happens and try to bring out the stories, but.
You've had us thinking about the merger.
Right.
What about pastors that were former EUB or United Brethren, to hear from them, what that was like for the merger?
And you pastor go to a Methodist.
Yeah.
And vice versa.
Is that going to be enough to, are we all interested in merger next year, or some of us discussing that?
Oh, that would be interesting.
It's very.
Okay, I'm going to get you to sign up right now.
Well, I think it would be good to get some of those stories out because a lot of those
gonna be
people aren't
lost.
going to be here much longer.
Right.
It's going to be lost.
Not just clergy.
Can I say one more thing?
Of course.
What I wanted to say is that, as we talk about, women struggles to be in ministry as clergies, I want you guys to know that, for me, it's kind of like a double whammy, women and also a minority, you know what I mean? And so it's double hard. And when I was first appointed, when I told you about the struggle that I had with being appointed to a Hmong church, and we went back and forth, and they refused because they said, we're just not ready for a woman pastor. And then when I found out, and it was even after annual conference, it was 2 weeks. I have 2 weeks notice to move. And so when I found out that I was appointed to this church, I was like sick in my stomach. I was just like, oh, because it's a white church, and for me, white people are my superior. You know what I mean? Because white people, I see white people as rich, they're smart.
Absolutely, yeah.
And who am I?
Yeah.
Am I going to be able to be a pastor for them? So it was really scary, I tell you. It was really frightening. Just the thought of being the pastor, but then also being pastor for this white congregation. Yeah. So I just kind of want to share that with you because I think as a minority, women, I think it's double hard somehow, and you're being judged because of your accent. Sometimes they say, "Oh, I can't understand you," or whatever. You know what I mean? So it is really hard. But I am blessed to have a really gracious congregation, and I have wonderful time with them. So I'm just blessed. But I just want to share that with you that as a minority woman, it is double whammy.
And we found out that we really aren't rich and we really
And I tell them now that you're just like me. You're just
But I thank you for sharing it with us.
4 years. Yeah. And some of the people that I was afraid of are like the nicest people. And so it is all in our head. It is how we project ourselves to people, and so you just have to give people a chance. And even if I ever come to your church, don't judge me by the way I look, but judge me as a person just like you. And I do that with everybody. So and I think that's how I was able to overcome my fear of being a pastor for a white church. I just want to share that.
Well, I think it's a blessing that you came but today and also that you're in our conference, so thank you, Paula, really, honestly. Other closing remarks here or from any of our panel or questions?
I think they did well.
Well, thank you.
I guess I do want to.
I think Shomi has one more.
We talked about the 50s and what progress we have or changes we've made since then. but way back in the 1920s and before that, there was pretty strong feminist movement, which we tend to forget. The Depression and World War II kind of sidelined it. But I grew up reading biographies and autobiographies of women who were not in the general women's works, women's professions, and so forth. So yes, there was a gap, and but yes, there are great grandmothers behind us that prepared the way, even before we were on the scene.
Well, thank you all, but the normal close us with a song, right? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.